I've always been the kind of person who needs to get away every once in a while. Work, bills, traffic, people, it all piles up, and I need to breathe somewhere far from the noise. About 3 years ago, I booked an Airbnb cabin about 4 hours from my hometown in Virginia. It was tucked deep in the mountains, far enough away that the closest gas station was nearly half an hour down winding roads. That's exactly what I was looking for. Quiet, isolation, a little escape. When I arrived, the cabin was everything I hoped it would be. It was small but cozy, with wood-paneled walls and a big porch that overlooked the forest. The listing had promised privacy, and it delivered. There were maybe 3 or 4 other cabins scattered within a mile, but mine sat alone on a dirt road that ended right at the property. The backyard sloped straight into the tree line. Looking out from the porch, it was just an endless wall of dark pines. I got there early in the morning and spent some time exploring. The owner had left a swing chair hanging from the porch, and there was even a little fire pit out back. Inside, the place smelled faintly of cedar, with just enough modern touches: a flat screen on the wall, Wi-Fi, an electric stove. After the drive, I settled in quickly. That afternoon, I sat outside on the swing chair with a cup of coffee, soaking in the silence. The sun filtered through the trees, and for the first time in months, I felt calm. But then I noticed something that broke the spell. Out in the woods between the trunks of the pines, a man was walking. He was maybe 100 yards away, just far enough that I couldn't make out details, but I could see he wasn't dressed like a hiker. No backpack, no gear, just a plain dark jacket and jeans. His pace was casual, not hurried, not cautious. Like he belonged there. I figured he must be staying at one of the other cabins and had wandered too far. Nothing strange about that, right? People explore. I watched him until he disappeared deeper into the woods, then shrugged it off and went back to enjoying the day. That night, I cooked some pasta and put on a movie. It was maybe 9 o'clock when the doorbell rang. I nearly jumped. I didn't even realize the cabin had a doorbell, and I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, I thought maybe the host had stopped by, but when I opened the door, I froze. It was the same man I'd seen earlier in the woods. He stood on the porch, smiling at me like we were old friends. "Hey there," he said. "Sorry to bother you. I've been lost out here for a few hours. I was hoping you could help me find my cabin." Something about him felt off. Maybe it was how wide his smile was, or the way his eyes didn't quite match it. My instincts screamed at me, but I didn't want to be rude. "Yeah, sure," I said cautiously. "Let me grab my phone and you can search the address." I closed the door, walked a few steps to grab my phone from the couch, then returned. But when I opened the door again, the porch was empty. The man was gone. I stepped outside, scanning the yard, the gravel driveway, the trees. Nothing. Not even the sound of footsteps fading away. It was like he'd evaporated into the night air. Confused and uneasy, I went back inside, locking the door behind me. I stayed up for a while, ears straining at every creak of the cabin. But eventually, exhaustion won. Against all odds, I actually slept. The next morning, I woke up early, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat out on the back porch again. For a few minutes, everything was normal. The sound of birds, the breeze stirring through the trees. But then, my heart sank. There he was, the same man walking in the exact same spot in the woods as the day before, moving along the same path, as if on a loop. This time, I knew for certain he wasn't lost. So why had he come to my cabin? I went back inside and called a friend, just to talk it through. It felt better to have someone else on the line, to share my unease. I was mid-sentence when the doorbell rang again. My blood ran cold. I whispered to my friend what was happening and crept toward the door. When I opened it, the man was there again. Same smile, same line. "I've been lost for a few hours. Could you help me find my cabin?" But then he added something that made my skin crawl. "Could you grab your phone and search the address?" He said it exactly the way I had the night before, word for word, like he'd memorized my response. I slammed the door in his face. My friend was shouting in my ear now, telling me to get the hell out of there. I agreed instantly. Heart pounding, I rushed to pack my bags, checking through the peephole every few minutes. The porch was empty again. Finally, I loaded my bags into the car and backed down the gravel driveway. Relief started to creep in, until I looked up. Through the front window of the cabin, behind the curtains, the man was standing inside the house, watching me leave. I don't think I've ever driven faster in my life. When I got home, I contacted the Airbnb host and explained what had happened. His reply was short, almost dismissive. "Sorry you didn't enjoy your stay." That was it. No concern, no follow-up. Even now, I don't know what that man wanted, or how he got inside without me hearing a thing. But I still remember the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and the way he repeated my words like lines from a script. And I know deep down, if I had actually stepped away to grab my phone a second time, I might not have walked out of that cabin at all. I grew up with maps instead of GPS. My dad taught me to shoot bearings with a beat-up silver compass and read contour lines like fingerprints. Maybe that's why I get stubborn about hiking the old way. No marked trailheads, no color-coded blazes, just a topographic map wrapped in a Ziploc bag, and a plan to use the sun and whatever landmarks I can string together like breadcrumbs. The trip that still wakes me up some nights started in late October. The air in the Appalachians turns thin around then, sharp enough that you taste iron on your tongue when you breathe hard. My buddy Joel was supposed to come, but he got stuck working an emergency shift, and I had already packed food and taken the week off. I told myself it would be fine. I told myself I'd done harder routes alone. I told myself a lot of things I didn't fully believe. By noon on day one, I was 2 ridges in with the tree line thinning, the world opening into those long, soft blue mountains. I moved steady, checking the angle of the sun, chasing a crooked rock formation that looked like a leaning tooth. The plan was simple: ride the spine to a small lake cupped right under the ridge camp, then loop back a different way to avoid retracing steps. The map showed the lake like a teardrop, a small blue almond laid into green folds. When I stopped to drink, I could hear nothing but wind across dry leaves. No distant traffic, no planes, no voices. It felt like the world I was in had fallen out of the larger one, like a loose coin. At dusk, I pitched my tent on a bench of ground tucked behind a stand of birch. I boiled water, ate, read 3 pages of a paperback I'd hauled for no reason. That's when I heard it. A single clean snap of wood from the dark, just behind the tent. Not the scatter of a squirrel, not the crackle of the fire, a footstep finding a dead branch and breaking it. The sound made my brain split. Half of me cataloged it like I would a weather change, coolly, clinically. The other half pressed against my skin from the inside, shaking like a trapped bird. I grabbed my headlamp and swept light between the trees. The beam found nothing but pale trunks, long shadows. I called out in the most bored, unimpressed voice I could muster, the one you use when you want a black bear to think you're not worth the trouble. No response, no crash of retreat, just the fire ticking down and my breath fogging out. I stayed up longer than I wanted, letting the flames die slow. When I finally crawled into the tent, I kept the headlamp on my chest and told myself I'd wake up if anything came close. I woke up anyway, to silence as complete as a closed hand. Day 2 was all ridge. I moved faster than planned, almost like I was trying to outwalk the night. By late afternoon, I could smell water, the cold, clean metal scent lakes have in fall. I crested a last rise, and there it was. A dark piece of sky laid flat on the earth, rimmed with reeds and a ring of black spruce. I walked its edge on principle, scanning for other camps, trash, footprints. Nothing. I chose a spot at the tree line with my back protected. That's something else my dad taught me. Let the forest watch your front, not your back. When night settled, the lake turned to polished stone. Wind ran small fingers through the reeds. I kept hearing something that I didn't want to call footsteps. It was too slow for an animal spooked by fire, too careful. The steps came in pairs or threes, then paused, like someone was matching my own patterns of listening and waiting. I told myself I'd go home in the morning. There's no shame in changing your mind, I said out loud to no one. I crawled into the tent because there was nothing else to do but either sit up and feed the fire until dawn or lie down and roll the dice. Sometime after my thoughts started drifting, I heard the sudden, unmistakable cadence of a person running. Adrenaline burned away the fog in a second. I tore the zipper, shoved out into the dark, swung my headlamp wildly. 50 feet away, between two spruces, light caught skin. Bare, slick skin. A back, pale from hips to shoulders, spine a rope. Whoever it was already disappearing into the black, feet quiet in moss. For a moment, I thought I imagined it, until I looked down. Footprints. A mess of them. Not shoe prints. Bare feet. Long toes splayed in mud. Heels pressed deep, circling my tent in loops, like someone was walking a labyrinth around me while I slept. I stared at those prints until my eyes watered. Then I built the fire back up with clumsy hands and sat with my boots on, knife out, headlamp shining into emptiness. I didn't move again until color finally returned to the world. It took me less time to pack than it had to set up. I snapped a photo of the lake and another of the prints with my phone like that would prove anything to anyone. I took the ridge back fast, knees aching, lungs burning. Sometimes I stopped and listened because I felt something pace me in the timber. Not too close, never close. Only at the last hour did I realize my pack felt lighter. It wasn't empty, just off. A few things were gone: a protein bar, the little knife I keep in the side pocket, my spare lighter, not much. Nothing that mattered in daylight. In the dark, those missing ounces weighed 1,000 pounds. I still hike. I still carry a compass. But I don't sleep near lakes if I can help it anymore, and I don't ignore a single snapped branch behind my tent. And when people ask me why I'm so careful about where I set my back at night, I tell them about the cold line that ran from the nape of my neck down to my heels when that pale back flickered in my headlamp, as if something had passed right through my body and kept going. Spring break in our city means sideways rain and sirens. My roommate Brian had taken off for the week, and I'd planned the greatest vacation of all, being unbothered. The storm rolled in before sunset, one of those big panicked systems that make the trees bow and the power lines hum. I decided to lean into it. I pulled a blanket onto the couch, killed the overheads, and let the blue light of the TV wash the living room in a familiar glow. Around 11, the doorbell rang. I froze with the controller in my hand. Who rings a bell in that kind of weather? I walked to the door and checked the peephole. Empty porch. The street was a smeared watercolor of rain. Nobody out there. I cracked the door anyway, and the wind slapped my face hard enough to sting. No one. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to make a joke out of it. Maybe the pressure change set it off, I told myself. Maybe we've got a poltergeist who obeys HOA quiet hours. 2 minutes later, something crashed in the backyard. I ran to the slider and looked out. Our cheap patio set had transformed into flying shrapnel. The wind tipped a chair, rolled it like a tire. The table cartwheeled and banged into the fence. I swore at myself and pulled on shoes. Out there, the rain didn't feel like water. It felt like handfuls of gravel. I wrestled the furniture against the house until my arms shook and my fingers went numb. When I turned to sprint back inside, I saw someone standing at the fence line. Not moving, not helping. Just there. There's a particular kind of fear that doesn't spike. It sinks, like cold water pouring through your ribcage. I bolted back inside and slammed the slider, my breath fogging the glass. The yard was empty by the time I looked again. Nerves, I thought, or some poor neighbor checking his fence. Either way, I locked the door and told myself I'd laugh about it tomorrow. Eventually, the storm became a sound machine. The TV chattered to an empty room, and my eyes shut on their own. I woke up sometime later, the way you do when your brain hits a speed bump during sleep. The sense of falling without moving. The house groaned. I pushed the blanket off and swung my feet to the floor. They landed in water. Shock wakes you faster than coffee. I looked down. A shallow puddle lapped against my socks, not from the roof or a broken pipe, but shaped like a trail. Puddle to puddle, leading past the couch. I followed with my eyes, already shaking. Each puddle was stamped with a faint outline, shoe treads softened by mud. The trail started at the back door. I reached automatically for my phone and stopped. What if they're still inside? The thought ran its nails across my brain and took up residence there. I slipped into the darkest corner of the room, the one where I could see the hall and both doors, and I didn't breathe for what felt like a minute straight. Then I called 911 and whispered like the wind might overhear me. The dispatcher asked if I could see anyone. I told her no. I told her there were footprints, and they went past me, and I was alone, and I didn't know how long they'd been there watching me sleep. The officers didn't take long. Blue and red strobes touched the ceiling while I held the door open for them and fumbled with my words. They cleared the rooms, moved with practiced boredom. Nothing missing, one of them said. Like that made it better. Looks like they wanted you to know they were here. He said it without malice, just a conclusion drawn from 100 similar nights. After they left, the house was louder somehow. The refrigerator had a personality. The walls ticked with their own pulse. I mopped the floor because I couldn't stand the thought of stepping around those prints until morning. When I reached the back door, my chest tightened. The lock was vertical. When I'd sprinted in from the backyard chaos, I must have forgotten to turn it. In my head, I replayed the scene I didn't witness. The door sliding open with a whisper. Wet shoes whispering across the threshold. A person standing next to my couch, watching my mouth hang open in sleep. The storm howling so loud that the house swallowed the intruder whole. The next day, Brian came home and listened, trying to make it make sense. There are always good explanations that don't feel good. Delivery guys sometimes hit doorbells on the wrong houses. Some tweaker could have used the deck overhang to get out of the rain for a minute, then wandered in when he saw the handle wasn't locked. It was a prank. It was nothing. The brain starves for any story that doesn't end in someone stood over you and decided not to kill you. At night, the house doesn't have to try hard to be scary anymore. It just has to be itself. Every spring since, the first big storm makes me clean the locks with a toothbrush and triple check what I already checked, and I sleep downstairs with the lights on, listening for the sound of soft, muddy steps that I hope I never hear again. When my friend Sierra asked me to house sit, I said yes so fast it sounded like a cough. 2 weeks in a clean, quiet place with a decent espresso machine and a couch that didn't look like a vet's waiting room? Easy. All I had to do was feed her lizards and fish and make sure the plants didn't die. Her neighborhood sat just outside the city line. Wide streets, tidy lawns, a kind of curated silence that felt expensive. The first week was blissfully dull. I worked on my laptop at the kitchen table where the morning light came in perfectly. I pretended I lived there and could afford to forget to check price tags. One evening, around 7, I was texting Sierra a photo of a Monstera new leaf when I heard it. A small cough right outside the back door. close enough that the sound rang off the glass. I froze with my thumbs over the keyboard. The cough didn't come again. I got up and flicked on the patio lights, like that act alone might send a message. "You're seen." After a minute of holding myself still, I peeked through the blinds. Nothing. The yard sat empty, the gate latched, the fence dark. I stood there and listened hard. Wind? A distant dog? Finally, I told myself it was a neighbor, shrugged, and went back to whatever I had been doing before my heart moved into my throat. On my way out to get food, I noticed tracks in the lawn. Not muddy shoe prints, just grass laid down in a path that ran from the sidewalk to the back corner of the house and back again. Somebody had walked there recently enough to leave a darker trail. It made no sense. Who detours from the open sidewalk to take a patient stroll along a stranger's fence line and then returns to the sidewalk like they'd checked something off a list? That night, I was in bed by 11, a rare achievement for me. I doom-scrolled for half an hour until my eyes turned to sand, then turned off the light. The house settled. Somewhere in the ducts, metal popped. That's when I heard footsteps across the front yard. The soft, hollow thuds of shoes on dry grass, followed by the faintest rattle at the back door, like someone tested the handle and found it locked. My body knew before my brain did. I was up and moving, switching on the downstairs lights to make the house glow like an aquarium. The sound at the back door stopped at once, which somehow felt worse. I walked halfway down the stairs and leaned over the railing to get a clear sightline at the slider. Empty. 5 seconds later, the living room window shattered. There is no sound like glass breaking when you're alone in a house that isn't yours. It's a gunshot you can't shoot back at. I bolted up the last few stairs and into the bedroom, slammed the door, locked it, and shoved a chair under the handle because that's what movies teach you to do. I called 911. As the operator asked me to repeat the address, the noise changed from precise to savage. Below me, the intruder wasn't searching. He was wrecking. Furniture scraped. Frames hit the floor. A low, furious cough punctuated the chaos like a tick. He came up the stairs running. The bedroom door shook in its frame. The wood flexed. A panel cracked out and clattered onto the carpet, leaving a fist-sized hole. A hand reached through, groped for the lock, and then didn't grab it. That's the part that turned fear into acid in my blood. He could have unlocked it in 2 seconds. Instead, he pulled his arm back and began to smash the hallway wall. Then the spare room door. Then the dresser out there, swinging something heavy and metal. It sounded like vandalism with a mission. Like he was trying to complete a checklist called Destroy Everything Sierra Loves. When the police finally rolled up, the house looked like a drunk giant had tried to redecorate. The man was gone. Out the window he broke to get in, the yard chewing his footsteps into nothing before anyone noticed. Nothing was missing. No electronics, no jewelry, no old cash jar. It wasn't a robbery. It was a message. Personal, one officer said kindly, seeing my face. He wasn't after you. I thought that would make me feel better, but it didn't. Because in the minute he stood outside the door with his arm through the hole, he didn't even acknowledge me as a person. He didn't threaten. He didn't speak. He simply existed like a fact, like a force of nature that passes through and changes barometric pressure as it goes. When I think about that night, I don't remember the shattering glass as clearly as I remember the sound of him turning away from me to break something else on purpose. The way my fear shrank, not because I was safe, but because I did not matter to him at all. Sierra flew home early. We stood together in what used to be her living room and tried to make lists. Insurance, locksmith, contractors, cameras. She kept saying she didn't know who would do this, which scared me more than if she had rattled off 3 possible names. I told her about the cough, and for a beat, her face shifted like she recognized it. Then it was gone. I stayed that night anyway. because leaving felt like abandoning a ship in a storm. I slept upstairs in the room with the damaged door. The chair still jammed under the handle because ritual matters, even when it's useless. In the early morning hour, that isn't quite night or day, I woke to the echo of a cough in my head and lay there, eyes open, until the light outside turned gray enough to put the world back into focus. I will never know what that man would have done if I'd opened the door. I will never know why the act of ignoring me felt so clinical, so deliberate. I only know that the next time someone says house sitting is easy money, I will smile and change the subject, because some houses don't want sitters, and some grudges don't need names to make a mess of your life. Working the graveyard shift at a gas station doesn't usually mean much. You stock shelves, ring up the occasional drunk driver looking for snacks, and try not to think about how the fluorescent lights make your skin look gray. That's all I expected from a rainy Tuesday in late March, the kind where water sheets across the lot and turns the asphalt shiny black. It was a little after midnight when I noticed him. A man in a dark hoodie stood outside, tapping on the glass door. The door wasn't locked, but instead of walking in, he just tapped. Slow, deliberate, like he didn't know what else to do. I waved him in, trying not to look annoyed. He finally pushed the door open and shuffled inside, water dripping from his clothes. He never made eye contact, just walked up to the counter, asked for a pack of cigarettes, handed me a damp bill, and left. I thought that was it, but then I noticed there were no cars outside. He hadn't pulled in, hadn't filled up. He just walked away into the rain, head down, disappearing toward the highway shoulder. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who goes out in a storm like that just to buy smokes? With no car? Maybe he lived nearby, but even then he'd walked into the storm for no reason. An hour later, the tapping came again. Same man, same spot at the glass door. His hood still shadowed his face, water running off his shoulders in rivulets. I walked over, a little annoyed now. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer, just pointed past me toward the pumps. I followed his hand and saw a red plastic gas container sitting by one of the islands. No car in sight. "Down the road," he finally said, voice flat. I figured he didn't speak much English, maybe stranded somewhere nearby. He handed me a credit card and gestured for me to fill it. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside with him. The rain slapped against my jacket as I bent to pump the gas. The man stood too close behind me, close enough I could feel his breath. My instincts screamed. When the container was full, I shoved it at him and turned to head back. That's when he grabbed my arm. His grip was strong, too strong, and he muttered in a language I couldn't understand. My chest went tight. I pulled away and started walking faster toward the door. That's when I saw him. A second man was behind the counter, rifling through shelves, shoving packs of cigarettes and cash into a backpack. He froze when he saw me, then vaulted over the counter like a wild animal. I spun back, but before I could move, something hard smashed against my skull. The world went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor near the counter. My head throbbed, wet with blood. The red container was gone, the two men gone with it. Later, the security footage would show the second man carrying a gun as he ran. My body went cold when the police pointed it out. If I had resisted even a little, if I hadn't gone down so fast, maybe that gun would have been the last thing I saw. Now, when rain pounds the gas station roof, when someone lingers too long outside, I feel that grip on my arm all over again. And I remember the man's voice, low and hurried, like he wasn't speaking to me at all, but to someone waiting just out of sight. I've always loved dogs, which is why I signed up on Rover during college. A little extra money to hang out with people's pets while they were out of town seemed like a dream gig. That's how I ended up at a stranger's house in California, tasked with watching a big husky named Bear while his owners vacationed for 5 days. The first few nights were normal. Bear was affectionate, even if he hogged the bed. I watched movies late, raided the fridge like they told me I could, and enjoyed the break from my dorm's paper-thin walls. But on Monday night, there was a knock at the front door. I peeked through the peephole. A man stood there in a black uniform that looked vaguely like a police outfit, though I couldn't see a badge. "Hello," he said when I cracked the door. "I'm looking for a George." "There's no George here," I replied, my voice too casual. "I'm just dog-sitting." He nodded slowly, asked how long I'd be there, then smiled thinly and left. It left a sour taste in my stomach. 2 nights later, Bear woke me up at 3:05 a.m., barking furiously at the front door. His hackles were raised, teeth bared. My heart was already hammering when I crept to the peephole. The same man was back, only this time, he wasn't alone. Another figure stood beside him, also in a dark security-style uniform. They didn't knock. They just stood there, waiting. I backed away, Bear still snarling, and grabbed my phone. My hands shook as I dialed, but before I could hit call, I peeked again. The men were gone. I opened the door just enough to look outside. No squad car, no flashing lights, no vehicle at all. Just 2 men who vanished into the night. I didn't sleep again until morning, and I never agreed to another dog-sitting job after that. Road trips sound romantic until it's day 6, and you're exhausted, alone and desperate for a bed.
Come closer.
That's where I was, halfway between 2 cities, eyelids drooping as the clock crept toward midnight. When I saw a neon sign for a small roadside motel, I pulled in. The place was nearly empty, a 1-story strip of rooms with doors facing the lot. The woman at the front desk barely looked at me as she handed me a key card. The room was old, but fine, until someone knocked just minutes after I set my bag down. I opened the door a crack. A man stood there, muttering nonsense under his breath. Then, without warning, he shoved at the door, trying to force his way inside. I slammed it shut and locked the deadbolt, my heart pounding. He left. I convinced myself he was high, confused, wandering the wrong room, but at 2 a.m., the knocking came again. Harder this time. I put the chain latch on before cracking it open. The man lunged at the door, ramming it so hard the frame shook. He screamed incoherently, then pulled out a knife, jamming it through the gap, sawing at the chain. I stumbled back, dialing 911 as he kept slamming and cutting, the metal clinking like teeth. Eventually, it went quiet. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone, but the knife scratches on the chain were proof enough. Even now, I sometimes wake to phantom knocks, swearing I hear a blade sliding against a latch that refuses to break. When I first moved into my new house, I thought I was stepping into the dream I'd been chasing for years. A small suburban home on a quiet cul-de-sac, with a yard big enough for a dog someday, and a porch where I could drink coffee in the mornings. The neighborhood was new to me, but it seemed safe. Families walked in the evenings, lawns were freshly mowed, and the air carried the faint hum of sprinklers at night. It felt almost too perfect. But then I noticed the man across the street. At first, it was nothing more than the way his eyes lingered a little too long. Whenever I pulled into the driveway, I'd see him standing on his porch, arms crossed, watching me unload groceries. When I brought in a piece of furniture, he watched. When I watered the flowers, he watched. I tried to excuse it. Maybe he was just curious about the new neighbor. But weeks passed, and his staring didn't stop. He never waved, never smiled, never spoke a single word. Just stood there, motionless, as if my life was a television show, and he was the only one in the audience. One evening, I sat on my couch with the blinds open just enough to see across the street. The man was in his driveway, but not moving. He stood there for nearly an hour, not doing anything. No car to wash, no trash to take out, just standing in the middle of his driveway, head tilted slightly toward my house, eyes fixed on my window. My stomach turned cold. I closed the blinds and told myself I was overthinking, that people in quiet neighborhoods had their quirks. Then came the night of the ladder. It was around 1 a.m., and I was lying in bed, scrolling my phone. The house silent, except for the low hum of the fridge downstairs. That's when I heard it. A scraping sound. Metal dragging softly against the ground outside. My first thought was maybe raccoons messing with the trash cans. I got up and looked through my bedroom window. What I saw made me gasp so loudly, I clapped my own hand over my mouth. The neighbor's face was inches from mine. His pale features pressed against the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly into my room. My heart jumped to my throat. How was he up here? Then I saw the answer. A ladder leaned against the side of my house, stretching up to my window. He had dragged it across the street in the middle of the night, set it up silently, and climbed to the second floor, just to look in at me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rug. My mind screamed at me to do something, but my body was frozen. The man didn't move, didn't flinch at being caught. He just kept staring, his breath fogging a small patch of the glass. Finally, instinct kicked in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering the address as quietly as possible while keeping my eyes on him. When the dispatcher confirmed help was on the way, I dared another glance. The man was climbing down the ladder, moving slowly, deliberately, as if he wasn't afraid of being caught. By the time the police arrived, he was dragging the ladder back toward his yard. They caught him halfway across the street. He denied everything, said he was just doing some late-night repairs. But the officers didn't buy it. Not when they saw the fresh scrape marks on the road where he'd hauled the ladder. Not when I told them how often he watched me. They made him go inside, warned him sternly, and promised me they'd file a report. But that didn't erase the memory of his face at my window, his eyes drilling into me through the glass. For weeks afterward, every creak in the house at night felt like footsteps on the roof. Every time the blind shifted, I expected to see him standing in the yard, waiting for the right moment to climb again. Some neighbors are nosy, some are lonely, and some are something else entirely. Something that doesn't stop at staring. Something that needs to get closer no matter what it takes. When my brother moved out, I couldn't afford our apartment anymore. Desperation led me to Craigslist, where I found a listing. Room for rent, utilities included, quiet neighborhood. The rent was cheap, almost suspiciously cheap, but I told myself beggars couldn't be choosers. The landlord, a man named Evan, responded quickly to my inquiry. He lived alone, said he just wanted to rent out his spare room. When I arrived, he greeted me in the garage. He was in his mid-30s, a little awkward, eyes darting too much, but otherwise harmless. The house itself was small, clean, and quiet. I moved my things in that same day. That night, I noticed something strange. My bedroom door didn't have a lock. Well, technically it did, but it was installed on the outside. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Who puts a lock on the outside of a bedroom? I asked Evan about it casually, and he acted surprised. Said he never noticed it before, promised to flip it around the next day. His awkward laugh didn't put me at ease, but I brushed it off. Later that night, I woke to faint creaks in the hallway. I held my breath as footsteps stopped outside my door. Then came the click, the sound of a lock turning. My blood went cold. I jumped out of bed, heart slamming in my chest, and rattled the knob. It was locked, from the outside. "Evan!" I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. "Open the door!" For several seconds, silence. Then I heard his footsteps return, slow and hesitant. The lock turned, and the door swung open. He stood there, pale and nervous, stammering that he just wanted to feel safe because he didn't know me yet. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the couch with my bags half packed, waiting for sunrise. In the morning, I decided to leave.
Welcome here.
I began hauling my boxes to a U-Haul I'd rented. Evan didn't stop me at first, but when I came in to grab the last box, he appeared in the doorway. His face was blank, emotionless. "You forgot this," he said, holding out the box. Relieved, I took it from him and carried it toward the truck. That's when he grabbed the door of the U-Haul and tried to slam it shut on me. I shoved back with every ounce of strength I had, knocking him off balance. He stumbled, then ran, not back inside the house, but out into the woods behind the property. I didn't wait to see where he went. I slammed the U-Haul shut, jumped in the cab, and sped away. I still wonder what would have happened if I had stayed another night. Why was the lock on the outside? Why did he try to trap me in the truck? Evan wasn't just awkward, he was dangerous. And he's still out there somewhere, with a house that probably still has a lock facing the wrong way. After months of apartment hopping, I finally thought I'd found the perfect place. A small rental house in the countryside, quiet and affordable. My landlord, Mr. Keller, seemed polite enough when I signed the lease, but he started showing up unannounced. At first, it was during the day. He'd knock on the door, smiling, asking how I was settling in. Once or twice, I let him inside, thinking maybe he needed to check something. But he never actually did anything. He'd just linger, looking around, making small talk. Then it started happening at night. One evening, just after dinner, I went for a walk. When I returned, I noticed a car parked down the street. It was his. He wasn't inside. I hurried in, locked the doors, and tried to ignore the way my skin prickled with unease. At 12:30 a.m., there was a knock. I peeked through the peephole. Keller stood there with a wide smile and a large duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "I need to check the basement," he said cheerfully when I cracked the door. "Got an alert on my phone. Gas leak." But the alarms in the house were silent. I told him it could wait until morning. His smile didn't fade. He pushed past me into the living room, setting the duffel bag on the floor. "Won't take long," he said. "Just a quick fix." He opened the basement door and gestured for me to follow. My stomach dropped. Something in his tone, in the casual way he expected me to obey, set every alarm bell ringing in my head. I forced a nervous laugh and said I'd grab my phone to take pictures for my records. He nodded and disappeared down the stairs. The moment he was out of sight, I crouched by the duffel bag and unzipped it just enough to peek inside. My blood froze. There were no tools, no wrenches, no pipe fittings, nothing for a gas leak. Instead, I saw lengths of rope, duct tape, and something heavy wrapped in cloth. I zipped it shut, grabbed my keys, and bolted out the door. I called the police from a nearby parking lot, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. By the time they arrived, Keller was still at the house, but the bag was gone. He denied everything, claimed he was just checking on a possible issue. The police couldn't do much. I broke my lease and moved out within the week. I still don't know what was in that bag or what he wanted me to see in that basement. But sometimes, late at night, I replay the smile he gave me as he said, "It'll only take a minute." And I know, deep in my bones, that if I had followed him down those steps, I wouldn't have come back up.